From Madrid to Kyiv. But why? We spoke with Carlos Zapata, a physicist turned activist, about his planned journey across Europe to Ukraine, the motivations behind it, and what he hopes to achieve along the way. This is an interview with Carlos Zapata on Forum Europaeum. Hello everyone, this is the newest episode of the Forum Europaeum podcast, and today we are here with Carlos Zapata from Spain, and thank you very much for joining us for this episode.
Thank you, Daniel, for having me.
Okay, for me this discussion will be really interesting, at least, because I think that you really made an interesting career path, I would say, and I would like to ask a question which is connected to that. So, you built your career as a theoretical physicist and a mathematician, but you had like a turning point, and now you're more interested in politics and especially in Ukraine, as we see it in the background. So what's the reason of this, and how did you manage to get there?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the question. I am indeed in this moment of change in my career. Um, I, Although I would say that the change of it's not a change in career so much immediately, more a change in sensibilities and change in paying attention to certain patterns in the world. I always define myself as a European when it comes to where my motivations, values, interests are coming from. Obviously, I very much ascribe to the universalist ideas that have been so essential to Europe's history, and science being one of the most obvious ones, I guess. I actually never had to, growing up, I never had to single out Europe as a special place in the world, because I was already within this belief that what we were discovering as a species, and even as a thinking planet, if you think not only of humans as thinking beings, but just the whole biosphere that has happened on this earth, I was really thinking in those universalist terms, right? I was never having to say, "Oh, European values have to be protected; they are now under threat," and all these narratives. It's not that I didn't see them; is that they were not really commonplace, right? 10, 20 years ago, but. At some point, and I should also add that I was always even though my interest was in mathematics and physics and the fundamental science, mostly what is called natural sciences traditionally, I was always very aware of the structures that enabled what I was doing. So I was always aware that I had grown up in the 90s in Spain, which, for those of you who know, this was one of the best places that can represent the accession to the EU in the 80s, and then all the economic boom that came from several factors, but among others being part of the EU. And I saw the development around me everywhere. So where I am standing now actually didn't exist 20 years ago. I was born back there a few hundred meters, and this was just countryside. It was not like underdeveloped. It was just literally there was no city here, and now there's a very beautiful big avenues, green spaces. It's really quite a very nice area to live in. So I was always very aware that this was in the background, that this was enabling my life, and my only two personal projections had been either to be a researcher academic. When I was very young, I wanted to be a paleontologist, I guess as many kids that like dinosaurs, and then growing up a physicist and mathematician. But at some point I also wanted to consider being a movie director or being a cinematographer. So that those two path careers are very much late development societies careers, right? I could only even think of those because I had such a stable and prosperous economy going around me. So I was very aware that those were factors, but I never really paid attention to them until more recently, when these things became not guaranteed anymore, or the threat levels came so high as to have countries in this continent at war, right? As we know. So that was the changing point. But my transition, in some sense, is not uh, completely hanging my hat, my scientist hat. In some sense, I am still working full time, and I will be working full time even when I move to Ukraine as a scientist. And part of the whole endeavor is to continue that mission, but relocating physically to Ukraine, which is, I guess, will come up later in today's episode.
Yes. Um. So yeah, we spoke about this the great times, the 90s, and what we live in compared to that right now. Um, my question would be the following: like, what made you realize that we can also say history did not end, like
Yes.
Fukuyama said it? What made you realize that? What was the breaking point?
Yes. The wake up moment, perhaps,
Wake up
right?
moment. Yes.
Yes. I think it's. I mean, at this point, it's going to be very consistent with many other accounts from a lot of people. But the wake up moment was definitely the full scale invasion of Ukraine back in February 2022. I was my all my priors of my understanding of Europe had to be completely shaken up because I saw the news of a column of tanks heading to a European capital. I was very shocked by this. Obviously, now when I've come up to speed with the history and information, I see that almost as inevitable, given the signs that were there before. But at the time, that was quite shocking. So my immediate reaction was to study more history. Of course, try to see how I could help, but I was in a very awkward position at the time. I was in between jobs in the UK. It was complicated, so I didn't have much information. I thought that the most responsible thing for me to do back then, at the very beginning of the invasion, was to just learn, because I just had a gap of information. So I started reading history, and Soviet Union's history, Russia's history, the general Eastern European history, and then I came to meet some some Ukrainian colleagues through my work, and also because they came to Spain as refugees, and so I made some Ukrainian friends, and this was what connected me to the conflict more at a personal level, which had some impact, as we probably discuss later on. So that's I would say, the most important moment. The second moment that really compelled me, because that was, of course, 4.5 years ago now. But the moment that really compelled me to this current state, where I'm sort of very deliberately going for pro-European, pan-European values, protection of this sort of project that we have here going on in Europe, and these kinds of discussions. Of course, talking to someone like you, Daniel, is one of a very hopeful figure, as a young and very energetic individual that does that. That change came with the combination of events following the second Trump term in last year, right? So at the beginning of the term, I even remember my parents were quite dismayed that he got reelected, and I told them, but look, the first term wasn't that bad. I'm no fan of Trump at all. Like, I didn't have any sympathies, but I said, maybe it's not that bad. It's okay. And then a couple of months later, I had to eat my words, because this was the beginning of what we see today, right? And I mean, in a weird way, it's almost a welcome change, because I think what Trump and JD Vance at the time made us realize in Europe is something that we should have realized anyway, without an incompetent administration in the White House. I think that we needed the whole continent needed a wake up moment, not just in the individuals, right? And I think Trump and JD Vance really kind of speed run this process, really, just sped it up very very much. But so I would remember distinctly, the White House fallout with Zelensky, and Munich Security Conference speech by JD Vance, which was also quite damning. I remember, I heard those things, and I think I was again on a road trip in Spain with my parents, with some other colleagues. We had like time to discuss a broad range of issues. I remember saying, I don't know why I've never said this before, but I feel for the first time in my 30 something years on this earth that Europe needs defending, right? And it's strange because everyone here in Spain is extremely pro-European. It's very very hard to find Eurosceptics here in Spain, and at least staunch Eurosceptics. You might find people critical with some aspects, but it's really really hard to find people that are not like feeling deeply European and wanting to be in this European community. So I was almost surprising myself, thinking, why do I have this sense now that my go-to next step is to do something for Europe? And I remember at the time what I told my parents was, because they were asking me, "Oh, but you're going into this new job cause now I'm a principal investigator in a grant, which means that I am responsible for a whole project, and I have to take care of the funds and hire people and everything." And I was just beginning that job, and I said, but I already know what I want to do after that, because that is only for 2 3 years. And I said, after that, I want to do something for Europe. And at that time, it was completely vague and ill defined. I just said, I want to build the Europe that we are going to live in. And so I would say that was definitely the working moment where it seemed like inevitable and inescapable that as Europeans had to take responsibility for our own future in some sense. I mean, it sounds cliche, but I think it really kind of was that moment. And yeah, and so that's the moment I began searching for platforms online. When I found your initiatives and Nicodem's initiatives and all these like people that I now in conversation with, that began back then.
Yes, thank you very much. Like it's a really really interesting. It was a really interesting phenomenon how like Trump boosted the
Mm.
I would say Euro federalist movement,
Yep.
or at least the sentiment in the people of Europe that yes, we need to be stronger, and it we can only be stronger together. And in my opinion, before the war in Ukraine, um, we as Europeans saw like the European Union as a framework which provides us prosperity.
Yeah.
But since the war in Ukraine, or the invasion of Ukraine,
Mhm.
um, I think that we see the European Union as someone that can like defend us,
Yeah.
or as a framework through which we can defend us. Although many times it wasn't true. For
Yeah.
example, the coalition of the willing, but still, it's true that I think that the European society sees that we can only defend each other together. And yes, and you like spoke about moving to Ukraine as well. Like
Mhm.
it's a very demanding choice, I would say, a decision. Um, like there are many journalists as well that like say that it's even hard to like enter to Ukraine. But
Mm.
living there is a different thing, and especially well, Kiev is being bombed as well, many
Mhm.
times, even today, nowadays.
Yep. Today,
So
I think as well. Yes.
today as well. Then yeah. Um, so yeah, what made you make this decision?
So, um, what made me go to Ukraine was go to Ukraine. It's a bit the quickest way to answer it, right? Um, because of my academic collaborations I've been forming in the last few years, I had contacts with some mathematicians that were based in Lviv, and some of my friends' parents that came to Alicante as refugees here in Spain uh, lived in Kyiv. So at some point in the process of me getting active in European defense or European values and preservation and this kind of wave of hearing the call to action, so to speak, I reached out to all my Ukrainian colleagues and I asked around, and they said, "Well, the most immediate thing you can do is to just get into contact with Ukrainian scientists who are still in Ukraine and are starving for scientific connectivity, international collaborations, and so on." I said, well, that's very easy because I run a grant, and part of running a grant means that you need to find collaborators and you need to find students to do smaller parts of the project. So I thought, I'm just going to try and do this more towards Ukraine, or towards the Ukrainian environment. And so very quickly, when I joined some Zoom calls and some early communications, I was invited there. They said, "Oh, just we have funding for you to come and to stay at the university for a few days and so on." So this is very typical in the academic world, that you would invite academics between institutions. This is totally standard. But of course, inviting someone to Ukraine is in the wartime is not the most standard. And I didn't think twice. I thought, I mean, if I believe in this, in doing this while they are suffering a war, I would just go. It's not. I don't think of the danger, because the danger statistically is very low. Right? To visit some cities, to be paying attention, to be following, the advice of all the authorities and looking at the air raid alerts and all that. Statistically, you should be fine. Right? Like, it's not like you're going to fight at the front. This is a completely different story. It's just that it's more the perception of, oh, you're going into a country where bombs are falling. Sure, but statistically speaking, I should be more afraid to get on a car, right? That than to go to Ukraine in this capacity. Of course, I'm not trying to diminish the how unacceptable it is that missiles are falling. I mean, as long as one missile is falling and the potential for one death is there in this very criminal and unjustified way, I think we should do as much as possible to fix it. But if from a rational point of view, it's not the biggest threat for me, right? To consider that I'm going to be, blown up by a drone or a missile. So with this rationality, I just decided to go. I just decided to visit Lviv and also go to Kyiv for a couple of days to visit my friend's parents. And I have to say that during my visit to Ukraine, I discovered a very good thing, which was Ukrainian food, which was amazing. I was very surprised. I mean, I'm Spanish. I'm from Spain, and we have very high standards for food. So I'm from Alicante, which is the Mediterranean part. We have, like, some people say it's the best cuisine in Spain. I don't know about that, but it's definitely we have very high standards. And I was very surprised. I loved that food. And the other thing I found was the sense of the Ukrainian spirit. I saw it in people, how they were surviving the war. And one of the sentences that Oksana, my friend's mother, she lives in Kyiv, in eastern Kyiv. She showed me. I will just package the whole anecdote in one single bit of information, which is the morning after we had some air raids. Luckily, no drones fell that weekend. It was only missiles that were going for the energy plants. That was the beginning of the winter campaign. So that was early December, by the way. So the morning after, she tells me, "Look, the war is being fought in two places. There's the front line, and there's every Ukrainian's mind. Every day when we wake up, that's another front line. That's another way, another place where the fight is being fought." And I thought that was extremely inspiring because, I mean, she's a doctor at she's a neuropediatrist like my uncle. That's why the connection was made, because they were colleagues and they knew each other internationally. And to me, that was extremely inspiring. The fact that after 4 years of war, they had this spirit, this attitude that just going on their daily lives, going on buying some potatoes and buying some cheese and buying some, just going to, they took me to a music show because they knew I loved music. And it's this kind of keeping up with normal life as much as possible, even though there's scheduled blackouts, air raids every here and then. That to me was very, very inspiring. So that's something that I think changed a bit my personal alignment, because I didn't get any new information. I was following the sort of analysis and geopolitics of the situation quite closely, which I think good information sources. But when I came back from Ukraine, I took this sense of what the spirit of the people is over there, and visiting the Maidan Square with all the flags of the fallen defenders, and seeing people in the stations underground after the air raids and all that. That is just confronting reality, because you just see it in front of you. You're in the midst of this. So I think that just impacted me enough at a personal level that all the information that I had at a more rational or conscious level crystallized into the sort of call for action. Like, okay, so this seems to be Europe at war, right? It's not an abstract, European values, and we wave our hands about what it means. These are people who at some point have a European sentiment, and at some point, although the war is complex and there are many factors entering into this, one of the principal components is the Ukrainians in a majority wanted to lean towards Europe, and the response from Russia was to exert even more pressure and eventually go with a full invasion. So I think that's what connected me. And a very inspiring site in Kyiv was what they call, I think, Europe Square, which is next to the Maidan. And it's funny because you see this square. It's more like a roundabout for cars, but there's a massive NATO star in the middle and a lot of EU flags. And it's like, okay, funny. This is not a NATO country, not a EU country, but they have like a massive square in the middle of Kyiv dedicated to those things. So it was quite tangible over there. And so on my way back, I was resolved to try to do something, and it was a matter of, let's figure out what's the best thing I can do in my position as a mathematician and researcher with the connections I have. I had to think hard about what to do, and this is maybe we can get into that later. But that was the impact that I got from Kyiv. Yeah.
Yes, and thank you very much. And my question, like, connected to this would be the following: especially in the propaganda media of the former Hungarian government, we had to listen to things like Ukrainians don't want this war anymore. They want peace in every single way it's possible. Putin actually doesn't want to, like, the main narrative was that Putin, if he would like to, he could destroy Ukraine in like a couple of days, but he sees Ukrainians as a nation which is a brother to Russia. Therefore, he's so kind and he doesn't want to hurt them. And yeah, my main question would be the following: how did you see what's the sentiment, especially about the war in the people of Ukraine, and how do they see Russia? That's my other question.
Yeah, I have to say I will defer to the second question, because the first I didn't really get much from that. I haven't, as I said, I spent most of my time talking about mathematics and physics, and at the time I did spend with just Ukrainian people doing Ukrainian things like eating and so on. It was mostly about history and the situation at the moment, but I couldn't get into those details. However, it's important to dispel those kinds of narratives, because I was getting those narratives here at some point as well in Spain. We were getting, or I was in the UK at the time, but I was hearing them in Spanish media at the time at the beginning of the invasion, and this is the common narrative, right? Putin is just he's not a butcher, he's not a barbarian, he's not going to just roll over Ukraine. He wants to preserve life as much as possible. This is the typical narrative, right? That they have the power to just end the war in a couple of days and completely destroy Ukraine. I mean, this might be technically true with nuclear weapons, but but I think that's kind of out of the question, because they're not going to use nuclear weapons unless they really want to completely wipe themselves out of the map, in the process. So it's clearly part of the propaganda machine, as you say. So the sentiment that I saw from Ukrainians is that I think they're very convinced about the theory of victory they have, as they call it, right? The technical term that uses military uses is theory of victory, and you can see the patterns very clearly. They've been um, in my opinion, heroically going from going on this roller coaster of international support, especially with how changing the U.S. has been in this whole process, but also about how much Europe was giving Russia credit for the threats and all this escalation narrative that we've basically stopped hearing about since the last couple of years. At the beginning, it was everything. Every step had to be measured to the millimeter, because if you gone too far, it means World War III and it's over and whatnot, right? So the Ukrainians, I think, are very set in their theory of victory, and this theory of victory can be explained if you follow closely the news in Ukraine for about a week. You will get a sense of this theory of victory. You know that they have really acute problems of manpower at the military, understandably so, right? And so they are trying to compensate as much as possible with automation, i.e., drones and all manner of automated systems, surveillance, and a lot of sort of information technologies. And then they are trying to really exhaust the Russian military and military economy in the process, right? So they are trying to strike as much as possible logistic lines. They are trying to strike as much as possible production centers, refineries, anything to do with the oil economy, and so on. That is kind of the shape of their strategy, and they are in it as a job. You hear a lot of interviews of people that are both in the military and in cooperation groups that are civilian, saying, we just do our job. There's like they wake up and they almost go to the office. This is just our job now. We have to keep on putting pressure, keep on striking the logistic lines. We have to keep on, defending from the assaults along the front. It's really quite amazing to me that the war feels so professionalized right now after 4 years. And when in the beginning is really movie material, right? Everything was heroic. Everything was scrambling to put together a defense, because it really was quite disruptive force. The people were not even thinking that the campaign was really going to go through. I think I read the report. There was a very in-depth article a few months ago, I think for the fourth year anniversary of the invasion, that they released. And I think it is recorded that Zelensky himself did not believe that they were going to invade, even like 48 hours before the invasion, right? As much as we can tell, in his personal circles, the leadership of the country did not believe that this was a very strong possibility. At least the president of the country. There were other parts of the military were very convinced, and there was a bit of a controversy there of when they acted and so on. But it was clearly very shocking and surprising. But now, 4 years in, or 4.5 years in, things are very professionalized, and obviously in a heroic way, because the loss of life is just crazy. We don't know exact numbers, but any estimates are very, very, very high, and everyone is impacted. Everyone knows someone who's dead, or someone very close who lost someone in the war, right? So it's very intense in that sense. But I think the polls and the barometers that people are using to guide their opinion in Ukraine are reflecting this reality, that a lot of people are convinced that a bad ceasefire deal is worse than continuing the war. So obviously, victory for Ukrainians look like ideally going back to 1991 borders and getting back the territory and so on. But even before that, they are very convinced about we don't want a ceasefire if there are no security guarantees, if there are not boots on the ground for future invasions and so on. So my short version of the answer to your question about their attitude towards the war is that they are hunkered down. They are ready to go for the long haul. I've heard from different sources in Kyiv, not just like some group of friends or some colleagues at the university. I heard from different sources these attitudes of, okay, we have to do these things until victory comes. And they are delaying it. They don't know if it's 3 months, 3 years. It's just an abstract, potentially distant future. But they are very stoically, at least that was the sense I got from both the barometers, the sociological polls that you see, and the people that I was able to talk to. They had those attitudes.
Thank you. Yes, the next question is like connected to this sentiment, but
Mhm.
not the sentiment of the Ukrainians, but the sentiment of the mm, people in Europe about the war.
Yeah.
So you are from Spain,
Yeah.
and you've spoken about the lack of quality Spanish language coverage of the war. Um, like what do you think? What's the reason behind this? And how should someone um create a space where real and yeah, real information could be given to
Mhm.
for example, the Spanish audience?
Yeah. So I should begin with a disclaimer, because I've said this a couple of times before in sort of public forums, that the information space in the Spanish language is a bit poor when it comes to Ukraine. I should say there's really great journalism done by Spanish journalists about Ukraine, and there are a couple of really good books that were written. People had on the ground activity, and these are fantastic resources. The issue is more how a ongoing war that has civilian casualties every single week since the beginning of the invasion is effectively missing from the population consciousness, right? So it's not to diminish the work that was done in the past, but there's basically no one on the ground reporting. I can get into the reasons for that in a second, but for me, it's mostly the contrast with the English speaking space, right? If you want to get English language analysis and reporting from the ground, you have a few resources that are really great. And you have media from Ukraine, like Kyiv Independent and other journalists that are doing an amazing job there, and influencers from there that use English to communicate or translate into English. And then you have independent YouTubers and influencers that are there, actually living in Ukraine and reporting constantly from the ground, right? So this is something that's just not does not exist in the Spanish language. Um, which one could wonder if this is mostly due to geographical distance, which I think is a big factor. Of course, I mean, we are, I mean, after all, the most distant countries within Europe, I mean, for a reason. But I don't think there's any other better explanation. I think that Spain was in the Western bubble of information at the very beginning. So I remember distinctly the talking points here, even by fairly moderate commentators that would never be, recognized to be pro Putin or pro Kremlin here in Spain, that they were just spewing Kremlin talking points. They were just like repeating them verbatim, in say April, May, June of 2022, and everything, that Russia is mostly just reacting to NATO expansionism, and this kind of narrative that we all now understand in with detail and grain. They back then they were being thrown as plausible explanations and so on, and I think now no one does that because 4 years have passed and history has happened already. So it's more you would be called an ignorant student of history, or if you say those things at this point. But other than that, I don't think there's any. Um, I wouldn't say there's a particular operation to deprive the Spanish speaking community of good information. I would say though. I think the there must be some ties with Russia that go all the way back to. I mean, as a crash course in 20th century history of Spain, we had a very brief republic in the 30s, and during that time we were formally allied with the Soviet Union, right? And so when the civil war began in Spain, which is many of you will probably know, was a present to the Second World War. It was basically a dress rehearsal where the two sides were effectively the proxies of the full war that happened afterward. So maybe some parallels with the Ukraine war, who knows? But it's kind of the pattern. The Soviet Union was on the side of the republic, so it was on the side of democratic Spain at the time, and then as we know, the fascist side, the Franco regime, won, and from 39, when the war began, where Second World War begins, we had the fascist dictatorship all the way to 75 when he died. So in that history, the ties with the Soviet Union and Russia, communist parties and things like that, they were very popular in Spain, and I think there some ties have remained to the point where some of the most progressive left leaning parties nowadays actually had talking points defending Russia in the face of the facts on the ground in Ukraine, which is for me was absolutely mind boggling. Especially, I was growing up mostly left leaning myself, and my family, kind of socialist, in this kind of sphere. And I would say now that I'm much more of a centrist, I guess ideologically, I can really. I would say I would like to identify myself as a rational centrist. I don't know if that makes sense, but especially growing up, it was very shocking to me to see. Spokespeople from parties that were progressive, left leaning, that were just defending Russia. They were not making any apologies. They were just saying, "Oh, this is just self defense. NATO expansionism is the ill of the world." And so it was quite. There must be something of that going on, but I don't think that's a particularly strong force in preventing good information entering Spain. Um, so unfortunately, because of that lack of information, we do have a lot of Russian propaganda in Spanish. Unfortunately, there's. I tell this anecdote a few times, which is one of the reasons why I got into the whole uh, predicament of trying to help with the information space. Which is, I went on YouTube a few months ago and I searched for war in Ukraine in Spanish. I set the option, only Spanish results, and I got videos from a YouTube channel of a lady speaking very well spoken Spanish and doing seemingly geopolitical analysis. And so I watched into the video for a few minutes, and then I realized, wait a minute, these talking points are a bit strange. It was not blatant propaganda, but it was a bit strange. And then at some point she mentions, and hello from Donbass. I was like, I see. So she was living on the Russian side of the occupied Donbass. So it turns out it's a propaganda channel that it has hundreds of thousands of subscribers, and it was, for me, it was quite shocking because I realized that if anyone ever wanted to watch YouTube content about the war in Ukraine in Spanish, they were going to get that. She's producing a video a day with tens of thousands of views on this topic, and she's using this high quality propaganda, which is the one that doesn't look like propaganda, right? It's the one that is not. Oh, she's even criticizing Putin many times. She's saying, oh, the Kremlin should be harsher here. They made a mistake there, or so on. But then when you integrate a week long set of messages, it is completely. I wouldn't even say pro Putin, but it is imperialistic. We should be harsher with Ukraine. We should destroy whatever is necessary to get our goals, and to get the Novorossiya kind of idea going. I mean, it's really quite clear once you see it, but until you see it, it's damning. And as a final comment, I would say one of the intense days of me to convince myself that I should do something about it was scrolling through the comments down in the video, because if they get tens of thousands of views, you can imagine hundreds and hundreds of comments. And the number of comments from, I could recognize Spanish people, not just in Spanish, but actually from Spain, because of the way they use the language. It was just staggering. I was hearing so many hundreds of opinions of like, oh, when would these Ukrainians stop fighting and die? And, like all these like very harsh, very uh, exacerbated genocidal opinions thrown in, that I just, I don't believe these were bots, right? I just, I don't want to believe these were bots because it's too many, too organic in a way, and too unnecessary. Like, what are you doing? This writing some Spanish language comment that no one's going to read outside of that bubble, right? So anyway, that was very shocking. That was a very important moment for me in this particular journey of getting active in the whole European project operation and helping Ukraine and so on, to see that this was a thing happening. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing this. Um, Actually, the situation was exactly the same in Hungary,
Mhm.
while we are next to Ukraine, a neighbor
Mhm.
to Ukraine. But especially when the war broke out, um, every I would say 90% of the society listened to a channel in which an old man, who was said to be an expert, um, like said everything, and yeah, they were very pro Russia
Mm.
if you look at it. And besides that, there were some experts um, that that are actually agents of Russia,
Right.
and they spoke Hungarian and everything. But later it was revealed that they are Russian agents. And the most interesting thing, is that our former foreign minister, Peter Siarto, you might have seen his
Mhm.
great discussions with Sergei
Oh, yeah.
Lavrov,
Yes.
um, said that this Russian agent, I don't really remember if he said it after it was revealed or before that, because like they were so like crazy that you can't even tell. But he said that this guy was his favorite expert.
Mm.
So yeah, it was the same, and the sentiment from the people you mentioned. I also, especially when the war broke out, I also experienced that. So, for example, when like yes, the war broke out like 3 days after that. I remember I was still in high school. Um, I had a physics class actually, and I remember the teacher was saying that, yes, guys, it's so great. Viktor Orban is a friend of Putin, so it's good for us that they are friends. Orban is very smart. He's also a physicist. He's not, by the way.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, um, yeah, and people thought that we will get back Transcarpathia and these things.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
so yeah, and since then, I also feel that the narrative changed. So it's not that pro Russian.
Mhm.
Um, like you could see which party was elected in Hungary.
Mhm.
Not the pro Russian one.
Yeah.
So yes, once again, thank you for sharing this, because as we can see this, like, there are many similarities in every single country on how like Russians try to influence the society itself.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Something I wanted to add, just for
yeah,
clarification, is that um, I didn't want to mean that that was representative of what's going on societally in Spain, because Spain, uh, as a country, I think you can expect that when there's a humanitarian crisis, the support for Ukrainian civilians was absolutely unanimous. There was no crack in the stance, the official stance, and the public opinion about how you should uh, welcome refugees, donate, do whatever you can. Spain is a very passionate country. I know it's a kind of a stereotype, but it actually works this way. I'm not that representative of the Spanish temperament myself, because I'm very measured and rational, I guess. But this country does react to humanitarian crisis in a very strong way. So the support was immense, right? But this is more about the information space that remains after the humanitarian crisis is less pressing or less obvious, right? Because most people have left the country, so the migrant crisis is sort of dissolved into Europe now, and there's no longer news of a lot of people dying in like Mariupol or like this early frontline cities that were really quite high concentrations of civilian deaths, or like the Bucha and like all these places where they were quite bad, right? Those episodes are no longer happening, at least not so visibly or not so concentratedly, right? And so it doesn't make the news. So I think this regime of not having news about it just has made everyone oblivious. And of course, the war in Gaza also brought a lot of the attention, and Gaza is very strongly discussed in Spain. It's a very political issue here. So that's just, you know, lack of attention. And so the lack of attention creates these niches for all the pro-Russian narratives to really thrive. And so just to say that it was definitely not representative of what Spain was going through, and I don't see any shift towards more pro-Russian views. If anything, I think people are more sort of like, oh, isn't the war in Ukraine over? Didn't the Russians just like stagnate, and it's like they've redrawn the border and that's it? That's what because if you tell them that, roughly every day we are recording, tens of civilian deaths and hundreds of military deaths, they're like, what? What do you mean? That's those are super high numbers. Why I'm not aware of these numbers? So just to represent that the information space is just deprived of good information, but I don't think there's a particular tendency towards more or less pro Russian. It was always been quite pro Ukrainian, but we were quite, if anything, agnostic about Russia, which is bad enough. So
Yeah, thank you. But sadly, I think what I said was representative in Hungary. So, so yeah,
I understand.
yeah. Um, okay. So we spoke about, disinformation or misinformation. What do you think? How could we combat it, especially on a European level? Um, what are, the greatest tools to do that?
That's a great question, and that's one of the reasons I was so honored to be interviewed by you, because you're doing this initiative, and I have been thinking about this for a while. As you know, part of my involvement, as we just discussing, was about the information space, and being a scientist in a way. If you think about science in a very decentralized global sense, what we have is an information sharing protocol, right? It is science is many things. It's about theory and imagination and designing an experiment and then, verifying the experiment and all that. But when you zoom out and you take the average of what's going on, really what's going on is that information is flowing from a lot of different places. And the more it flows and the more decentralized the flow is, the more accurate it becomes, right? So in a way, I think of science as this sort of distillation of the ideal setup for how a media system should work. I mean, maybe this is too naive and too almost childish to think about, but I do think of good media environments operate a bit like science. And what that means is that, and this is really thanks to the advent of social media and the internet, that we are actually able to do this at scale, where you have individuals that report on things. For example, taking a video of an event or saying, oh, I just saw this and this in the background is that. And the thing is, if you take only one source, the video can be AI manipulated. The person can have extreme views or very distorted, or they can be delusional, or they can be very emotional and not really attend to reason for something. But if you take this over a population of millions, then there's a natural process by the network effects of the information sharing and by the fact that the world is one, right? There's a one true world outside that cannot be manipulated, with AI or digital, fake news or anything like that. There's an actual natural world going on. Eventually, the truth sort of flows as long as the information flow is very, very wide and cross communities, right? If it's actually very multi-layered and active, I think you're going to have a relatively healthy media space without much intervention or without much, oh, you absolutely need to do this to make sure that information is good. Now, that's one thing for the information space to be effective as an information space. But if if you are fighting a war, like people are in Ukraine, and we are maybe fighting a hybrid war in the rest of Europe, then one might need to start thinking about specific tools or specific strategies, as you say, to combat disinformation, polarization, and those kinds of things. So I haven't thought that much about it. I'm not an expert, of course. I'm a theoretical scientist, so I'm very detached from the real world most of the time. But what I can say is that I observe something quite curious about the ways that, let's say, the Russian disinformation strategy has been in the last few years. I think the effective disinformation campaign has always looked like li- leaning a lot on plausible deniability, lying a lot on um, equidistant arguments, right? It's like, oh, if I do this because I'm in this position, the same as you guys do this because you're not, it's like this game of equidistant positions and just attributing it to the complexities of the world. Like there are no values to be discussed. There's nothing to be upheld. It's just how things go. Everyone is looking for their own, and that's how things go. I think that has been extremely fruitful for a lot of political programs. Obviously, not just the Russians, but a lot of the alt right in Europe has relied on this a lot. I've seen it in Spain in our own flavors of these tendencies that you get people that are otherwise quite sensible and quite reasonable. They're not evil. They're not trying to kill anyone. They're not trying to destroy anything. But they're just getting to this cognitive loops of plausible deniabilities, but extreme cognitive biases in some cases, and then overblowing conclusions, and then it just creates quite divisive and quite strong tendencies in different directions, right? So I think the information space has now that sort of meta layer where, as you probably know better than I do, the Russians have, in particular, not only the Russians, of course, but the Russians are a good example of an agent or a party that has been trying to exploit, for example, polarization beyond the particular narratives. They don't really care what the particular narrative is as long as the democratic unity is being eroded. Right? They don't really care if they're saying that Russia is terrible, as long as there's a very pro-Russian side that is fighting, and they get into massive fights, and the institutional norms are broken because of this discussion. Because they, at the end of the day, they think they're waiting their opportunity to do their advances and so on. So I think this is a game that most of Europe, I mean, nowadays the people who are paying attention obviously know, but for the longest time, I don't think people were even aware that this could be a game, right? That they're just being played into the polarization dynamic, right? Similarly with American politics, right? I mean, not to get into that black hole of a topic, but it is. I think it's a very telling story from across the Atlantic that you get this absolute buffoon of a president and the whole host of clowns around him in the White House, simply because there's this polarization dynamics that might be a combination of malevolent actors and emergent dynamics that social media incentivize and so on, that we get that. So I'm not really answering your question. I'm just pointing out that we are playing at a field that is, I think, a little bit different from the usual environment that one exists in. Like if you look at 20th century, you would find how the main thing was the narratives and the ideas. Are you pro fascism or communism or capitalism or liberalism, or like all these different trends had to do with the war of ideas, which to some degree is good that we have that. But nowadays there's something playing on an orthogonal axis in a way. We're moving on a second dimension, beyond the axis of political discourse, which is the level of unity and the level of cohesion that a society expects. And of course, the migrant discussion, the migration discussion enters that very, very importantly, and so on. So I just think that we should think hard about that sort of meta level of discourse and the information space, which I think if Europe is going to be joint project across the continent that really rises up above what the EU has been. Not to say that we have to dismantle it and do something new, but that's something that is above and beyond what we have done so far. We're going to have to solve that problem. We're going to have to solve the information problem. And actually, I would just mention that I am one with an opinion about all these blockchain technologies, all these decentralization frameworks, and so on, as something that has a lot of potential for implementation. Of course, you have to kind of squint your eyes at all the scams and all the speculation side of it. But as technologies where we are moving more and more into a world where everything is digitalized, um, looking at ways that algorithmically you impose certain decentralizations and certain deregulations in some spaces. Like, for example, the information space, I think it will be great that we build something like a, I don't know what to call it, like Twitter or social, some kind of social platform that is public, that is European, right? And it has a protocol that cannot be by construction cannot be easily hacked, and that you can build apps on top, and you can have your own sort of like particular projects and particular products on top of it, but somehow ensures a very sort of cryptographically guaranteed transmission of information so that people can just send messages. I mean, I think that would be a massive achievement. I know this is like a an utopia to get to something like that, but I think it's one of those tools that, if you were able to implement something that algorithmically reassures you that as long as the thing is operating, it cannot be corrupted, because by construction, if it's operating, it will not be hacked by the nature of these cryptographic systems. I think that is very promising, and we probably should look into that at some point. But of course, we have much more pressing issues than doing a fancy version of Twitter for Europe. So,
Yeah, I agree, and I could, but at the same time, I would argue it's it's not like a very crucial issue, because, in my opinion, especially um viewing this whole problem from a Gramscian viewpoint, if um social media platforms like X, Reddit, Instagram, Facebook
mm,
are owned by the US,
mm,
and especially when the owners of these great platforms are so friendly to that crazy president.
yeah.
We saw how they appeared at his inauguration. I don't think we will able to control, the information about Ukraine, about Europe, and we won't have a space where we Europeans can speak freely and speak like in a framework which was built by us.
Mhm,
Like, I really like you mentioned X, for example. In the recently I tried to use X as well in order to find the news about Europe. Um, uh, like, can you guess what is going to appear when, like, you search Europe or the European Union on X?
I can't imagine. What did you find?
Only migration, like
Migration, yeah.
only
That was
migration,
that was my
nothing
top
else.
of my list.
Like, it doesn't matter, you search Europe, European Union, only migration and videos about migration to Europe. That's all.
Wow.
So yes, I think there's a need for, and as like sorry for talking this much about this,
No, no,
but
good.
actually this was one of the main reasons we started our project as well, to provide a space for Europeans to express their ideas
Mm,
on a European level. I remember I went to see like some news on Reddit, and there's like a specific button, in order for you just to see the news. And I read news about American senators. Who cares? Why am I influenced by them? I am not at all.
mhm, mhm.
So yes, I really like your idea about it. And moving to like further in this topic,
Hmm.
for you, like you spoke a bit about it, but how do you see European identity and like connected to Ukraine as well? We could also speak about um, Ukrainians, how they think about themselves, because there are, from what I know, two narratives. One is that they like became European, or they want to be attached to the West since they were attacked by Russia. And the other narrative is that they wanted to be European since a long time. So yes, these two questions.
Hmm. Um, I have to say, Ukraine's a very big country, and it's hard to make. Uh, it lives at the intersection of two big systems. I mean, historically, it was part of the Soviet Union, and it was, very constantly under the Russian imperial sphere of influence, and so there are many ties that have happened there. Right? It is a common pattern that happens with certain. I'm not an expert, obviously, on Eastern European history, but a lot of people report. Even when I was there, I was asking about one of my colleagues that his father was from Crimea, and he basically explained how during the Soviet Union they could get they were getting a lot of development in many areas and industrial development and schools and education and science and because I mean the Soviet Union had some good aspects. I mean, it's not to say that it was just a complete disaster of a system. It had some aspects to it that they were quite um, well, I would say well construed in the sense that they had a really strong focus on basic education, universal education for everyone, which is something that I think we believe in Europe, and I think it's something that it was not just invented by them; it was kind of an idea that has spread around the world, and but just the Soviets took it very deeply, and therefore there was a bunch of intellectual development that happened in the Soviet sphere that had to do with that, and obviously there's amazing Soviet science that happened during that time. And I call it Soviet just because it happened within that geographical area, not because it had any Soviet signature in the actual content of the science or the mathematics, right? And it's quite interesting. The topic of what sort of science across the Iron Curtain is quite an interesting. It's also in the mathematics, the kind of mathematics that happen in the West and across the Iron Curtain is also quite interesting. There's a very different focus on different topics. It's sort of interesting. You might imagine that some of it was part of a competitive struggle that they were trying to specialize and be the best in something, but also I think it's also just lack of communication because a lot of the Soviets did not speak English and a lot of the Westerners did not speak Russian. Right? So anyway, um, beyond that, I don't think I'm really in a good position to give an answer to this. I think one of the things I usually say about Europe is that it, what Europe is what we are making of it. Right? It's like I think it's a very sort of procedural definition of what Europe should be. The fact that we are having this podcast, the fact that we are, that I want to go to Ukraine and help out and uh, challenge people, especially, I'm challenging everyone now because they're in Spain. They're saying, "Are you crazy? Why are you going to Ukraine? Like, what is this? Where is this coming from?" Just the fact that these things are moving and the information is flowing. I think that to me is Europe. Europe is happening in those exchanges, right? Europe is not a flag. Europe is not a document that will be signed. Europe is not an institution that will be, put on a plaque in a big building somewhere in some Central European city. That's not for me. That's not Europe. Obviously, those are all manifestations, but to me, Europe is a process, and the process is what we are doing now. And under that lens, and with all the caveats that I'm not an expert on this, I can see, as I said earlier in the conversation, a principal component of the conflict being that there was a tendency of Ukrainians towards the I would say just generally the Western uh, framework and the Western system. And Euromaidan was a very important moment in this history, and I think everyone who's trying to write some kind of chronology of the conflict in Ukraine with Russia would put the Euromaidan protests and the whole, you know, the president fleeing to Russia and all the killings in the Maidan Square, all that they would put that at the very tip of the of the list, or very very high up in the list of causes for where we are at the present. Um, I think the geopolitical analysis of that situation is fairly transparent. I might be missing something, but my understanding is that you have a mostly younger generation that is very pro-European and want to internationalize and join up in the sphere of the rest of the world. And you have an older generation that maybe is not as enthusiastic, but when the kinetic events start to happen. So when bullets start to fly and the protests become very violent, and there's all this very visible Russian influence effects, then things get more polarized in a way that people who were more neutral about it or even skeptical about Europe suddenly realized, I don't know if I'm so much for Europe, but I'm definitely not for my kids being killed in Maidan, right? So I think that is my very layman's understanding of the geopolitical situation in Ukraine. Again, I'm not an expert, but I've seen enough correlates of that broad narrative with the facts on the ground, with reports and books that one can read and so on, that I feel like that is quite established for me out in the world. That Ukraine um, is now fighting a war of survival, and as both a people, people living there, and as a country, as an idea. But outside of that, I think there was a very clear tendency towards um, regeneration of their democratic system. And I would say one thing, for example, one anecdote when I was there is that when I was in Lviv, the news broke that this Andrei Yermak, the office of the president, the Zelensky's president office, got, I think it was detained at the time. It was some investigations were going on, and I asked my colleague there, my host at the university, saying, "Oh, how are you thinking through this? Right? Where are your feelings?" I said, "Well, it's great that someone is getting detained." His answer was like, I was thinking, "Oh, is this like the international image of the Ukrainian government is going to get damaged and so on?" That was my worry, right? Like how is the, or the actually the worry of, is there so much corruption that it's so bad that maybe we all thought it was less corrupt? And his answer was, before we know anything else, it's just great that the bureaus that were set up in 2014 are actually operating at the point to the point that they can detain someone in the president's office, right? So I think that was, to me, a very important indicator of Ukrainian society, right? That the general, and I think that opinion was quite broadly shared, because I saw it in the university community, and other people said as much, that they they understand they are in a very exceptional state, but nonetheless they are very aware of how their progression is going, and how they have all these issues with corruption, that they want to get better systems. So I saw that very spontaneously, even when I was asking a question purely in terms of coming from a place of worry. I was not being inquisitive. I got back an answer that was just praising the fact that anti-corruption bodies were operating even at war. So I think that that's what I would say. That I have a lot of evidence and a lot of signs that Ukraine is actually serious about joining the rule of law sort of standards, the international community, and so on. And I do think there's going to be an entirely different stream of things happening in Ukraine outside of the war. When there's a stable ceasefire, or some kind of resolute end of the war, I think there's a lot of things that are going to be surfaced for a lot of people that are not within Ukraine and know day to day what's going on over there. So, so yeah, my answer is, I think, I heard from some friend of mine in who's working in Brussels. I heard that Kyiv is the capital of Europe. So it's like from the outside, there are many people that are already seeing that a country that is fighting a war of survival, and at the same time, you know, uh, really rallying around the values and the support, because really Europe is supporting Ukraine quite a lot. Is you know it's very significant of what the European project should be, because as many people say, it is today Ukraine, but maybe it's Poland tomorrow, or it's the Baltics, and who knows what will come, right? So I think that's what I would. I hope that's that's a sensible answer, but yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's not just the people that think that Russia might attack Europe. Keir Starmer just said that Russia might attack Europe in 4 years recently. So yeah, I really agree with you. And thank you for sharing all of these comments on Ukraine. But I would like to ask a question about your country, Spain, which is quite supportive toward Ukraine itself, but at the same time, it's a geopolitical actor in some ways, at least in a symbolic way. For example, in the case of the conflict in the Middle East, I would say.
Mhm.
Um, so, as someone from Spain, how do you see Spain's position? I would say in Europe, and how in what way could Spain influence the European Union itself?
Mm.
Because, for example, Pedro Sanchez is often labeled as the face of the left, not just in Europe, but also in the world. Um,
Mm.
so yeah,
He's handsome, so he can be labeled that.
as far as I remember, he organized this meeting between the left-leaning leaders of the world, the Brazilian President Lula,
Mm.
the Mexican president was there. So yeah,
Yeah.
what do you think about these?
Yes, yes. It's a good question. I have to admit that I have not followed as I said earlier. My career was in the UK, so I lived most of my adult life in Edinburgh, actually. So, but I can certainly say something about what I think Spain's role in the European project, broadly speaking, could be. Um, One thing, I promise I'll answer that, but I wanted to connect to Ukraine for a second again, because one of the parallels that I observe in between Ukraine and Spain specifically is the sense of democracy not being for free, right? There are many countries where for generations and generations they've had democracy, and it's hard to trace the loss of democracy, or the retaking of democracy in the country. Spain has a very young democracy when you think about it. Our constitution is from 1978. So we became a fully democratic country in the European standard sense that we understand today in the late 70s, and we only really got into full operation in the 80s, because we had a coup d'etat in 81, and so basically the fascist side of the military was still unhappy with the transition to democracy. Um, so I think Spain's idiosyncratic history, which was very isolated. I always say the Pyrenees are high. The Pyrenees are a very high barrier in geographically. Obviously, it's not so much the fact that they are a geographic barrier, but Spain's history and Portugal's, the Iberian history, has been quite disconnected from the rest of Europe, because we had the Civil War right before the Second World War. It was literally the sort of prelude to the Second World War, and the country was in shambles by 1939. Right, so the country, we were neutral officially. I mean, Franco was allied with Hitler until the end of the Civil War, actually, because we then officially became neutral. Otherwise, we would have been bombed to oblivion, because there was nothing really that Spain could supply the Axis at that time. So the one of the big tragedies in Spain was that as the Second World War was progressing, and the Allies were retaking part of France, and the USSR was coming from the east and so on. As the European campaign was developing, a lot of most of the Spanish intellectual elite and the cultural elite was in exile, right? Because it was a very culturally the Civil War was really bad because the most of the scientific establishment, the cultural establishment, uh, maybe didn't have specifically left-leaning ideas generally, but they were very much opposed to an authoritarian regime like fascist dictatorship. So they just fled the country. They went to Mexico, they went to Latin America, they went to France, they went to all these places, right? So as World War II was coming to an end, a lot of the Spanish people across in the diaspora were holding their breath to see if the Allies would actually enter and liberate Spain. Because I mean, one understanding was that Franco had been allied with Hitler for the longest time. In fact, during the Civil War, there had been bombings from Italian and German aircraft in Spanish territory. So a lot of people, a lot of death happened in Spain in the hands of the Axis that was being fought in the European theater. So a lot of people were holding their breaths to see if Churchill will decide to actually enter Spain and liberate.
And he also like sent this Azul Legion to fight the Soviet Union as well.
Correct. Exactly. So this was a very heartbreaking moment where the war came to an end, and then years passed, Nuremberg trials and all these things, and then Franco was just left there. Franco played his card very smartly. He just branded himself very strongly anti-communist. So it was sort of preempting the Cold War phase before it even started. And so he became ally with the US. And so the US had a sort of a useful idiot almost figure in Franco. So unfortunately, that was 40 years of Franco's life, that until he literally biologically died, that we had to continue with a fascist regime in this country. So why am I mentioning this? Well, Ukraine came out of the Soviet Union in 1991, which is incidentally the year I was born. So maybe there's some more deeper connection there, but that's just a joke, of course. But that recency of democracy, I feel, resonates with the narratives, right? Like the fact that you want to make sure your institutions are properly established, and you need a lot of civilian involvement, active involvement in the development of the country. So the reason I say this is that my parents were born into the dictatorship. My parents are alive and well. This is not ancient history. They were born into the dictatorship. My grandma, who is still alive, was born into the republic and lived through the Civil War. And she's very old now, but she's been through democracy, dictatorship, and then back to democracy. And when I talk to them, there is a sense in which democracy, the values that were rooted in Spain, which I think you can attribute largely to like Catholicism, the social components of Catholicism, and the sort of the close knit infrastructure of Spanish society, which is very fraternal, very the coexistence is very peaceful until it was not so. You can see that the return to democracy is kind of just establishing that core set of values in and institutionalizing them. So that's why Spain, I think, since then has been a, relatively speaking, super progressive country, right? I say relatively, depending on who was in power, but Spain has been very, very progressive. It doesn't match with the pattern that we had 40 years of fascism, and then we go on to become one of the most socially progressive countries in the world. I think the reason is that when you remove the fascism component, what remains is this spirit that is very based in sort of social democratic values that traditionally attached to Christianity and all these values, but it is there, right? It's definitely there. It's the kind of society that can tear itself apart in a political debate and then go and have beer and watch football together and everything's fine. It's a cliche, but it's actually fundamented in. So I have in my group of friends, there are people that are quite conservative, liberal, right economic thinking, and people who proudly voted communist when back in the day, and they are just perfectly good friends. They would go to each other's birthdays and support each other's kids and things like that. So it's very plural and very transversal in that sense. And so I think we are naturally well defended against polarization. I think this country, because we came from an extremely polarizing conflict, and our story has been developing as a not concluded chapter of a larger history since the Civil War, and everyone is very aware we should not get back to families tearing themselves apart and killing, siblings killing each other in the war, right? That which did happen. So that is a very long-winded way of saying that the recency of the Spanish democracy, the modern democracy in Spain, uh, can give us some lessons, and I think people in Spain are um, can ask their parents, "Hey, what was it like to grow up with the uncertainty that you would have a democratic system?" Like my parents, when they came of age, they voted in the elections for the first time. That's about their generation. So they were 18 when the elections, the first elections ever happened. So I asked them, and I know their generation, and you can feel from that generation it was a massive mission, collective mission to like catch up with the rest of Europe, because hey guys, we've been under fascism for 40 years, and the rest of Europe, they got it out in 45, right? And we got it out 30 years later. So that that to me was a very important aspect of this society. And in fact, many of the discussions nowadays go in that direction of like, my parents' generation are all super pro-European, very aligned with democratic values, because they literally lived the transition. It is called that. Transition is the period of history of the 70s in Spain. They lived the transition, and the generations later, they have not lived the transition, and therefore are more likely to lose sight of that. So I think that's what Spain can bring. I mean, Spain has a very fundamental, as I say, set of societal values that I think are even cliche, to the point of being cliche, right? For good reason. And then also the fact that we had to go through this passage where evil was not uprooted like in the rest of Europe, where you go to Germany, you go to Austria, and history class is all about how did we get here, how to never repeat it again, right? Basically, in Spain, that's not really how history is taught. This might be a relic from Franco's time. It's not like the people are indoctrinated that Franco was good in school, not at all. But in some sense, it's just a relic that we teach the history linearly. We teach, one year after the other. We literally begin with the Big Bang, and we get to the 19th century, and everything's very complex, and we almost never get to the 20th century because of lack of curriculum time. So, it's. I think that's what Spain can bring. I think we have a population that knows what it means to build a democracy, and this is what I feel Ukraine seems so close to us, because they are very much in the process of building democracy. I think the institutions in Spain are relatively young the democratic institutions. Of course, you can trace them back many years to the 19th century and even 18th century, but there's a sense of active building. There's a sense of people are working together, and I think that's something that probably people from Germany or the UK or these kinds of countries or even France maybe don't relate as much, because there's been many more generations since those institutions were well established, and then ever since it's been more about keeping them, counterbalancing them and so on. In Spain, it's been literally we had to rebuild and sort of transition. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Um, Spain is, I would say, my favorite country in Europe. So
Okay.
I really like talking about.
Well, I'll be very happy to welcome you anytime. So.
Thank you very much. And Madrid is my favorite city as well. So, um, yeah, but as we started our podcast, you are moving out of Spain in order to live in Ukraine.
Yes.
But it's not that simple. You also have a fundraiser connected to it. Could you speak a bit more about that one?
Absolutely. Very glad to do so. So what I'm going to do, as I told you in earlier in the podcast, I resolved to go to Ukraine, and I decided I was going to go. So I finally made this concrete, and so I would put myself physically in Kyiv in very shortly. I hope by the end of July I should be on the way already. Dates are still to be confirmed, but sometime by August I should be in Kyiv for sure. So there's a fundraiser that I thought would be a good idea because some friends of mine, just spontaneously, not just Spanish friends, but also people from the Netherlands, UK, and so on, when they heard that I was going, they said, instead of the typical reaction, oh, what is it? Where are you going? So dangerous or whatever. They said, oh, I want to support you. I want to donate. I want to help. And I was like, maybe I should make this into a fundraiser. And so I just started looking out for what people are doing to fundraise and to support Ukraine. Of course, I was also in contact with my Ukrainian colleagues, and they immediately had friends in the military and friends in the emergency services and so on. So my current plan is as follows. I am planning to journey from Alicante, my hometown, where I am right now, all the way to Kyiv with a truck. So this truck would be donated to the armed forces of Ukraine, to a specific person, a specific unit, a specific purpose. So this is all spelled out in the campaign that you probably find in some description for this podcast. And the idea is twofold. So on the one hand, if anyone wants to support Ukraine through an initiative like mine, uh, this is the place to donate to. All the money will be only used to fund the truck, fund the all the equipment that goes with the truck to make it into an ambulance or some kind of emergency evacuation vehicle, something like that. And then the additional funding that we might get is to fund IT communication technology for drone detection. So the idea of this fundraiser is to really protect life in Ukraine. For those of you who have some moral quibbles with equipment, this is all non-lethal equipment. This is all life-protecting equipment that is meant to be protecting both defenders in the front line and civilians for due to better communications with IT equipment. So that's all. Every single cent of money will go to that end. That's just what it is. But what I am doing as an individual is I am going to drive that truck over there, and I want to make this into a very symbolic occasion of in some sense this is almost the longest path you can draw. Still follow more or less a straight line within the European continent. To do sort of Spain Ukraine is basically kind of the longest straight line that one can draw, and so I am very much looking forward to taking this trip, and I'll have to do at least two stops on the way because of the distance. And I will stop in France, Switzerland, Germany, Austria, Hungary. Potentially might detour a bit into Italy. But I will go. I will cross all these countries before getting to Kyiv. So I want to rally support for this campaign with the understanding that the financial support is important, and by the way, we are about halfway to the price of the truck, so at least that is coming along, and of course we still need a lot more, but this is coming together nicely. But the rest of the support, I want to have it as symbolic of like the European continent, the sort of the civilian population that is really passionate about being pan-European and building something together in this continent, is supporting this journey all the way from distant Iberian Peninsula, where really, to be perfectly honest, the geopolitical influence of Ukraine just collapsing tomorrow and being invaded fully by Russia is almost none. Right, like we have very right now, because the all the grain exports and all that is already being very affected. So the consequences of the war going super badly for Ukraine tomorrow in Spain, the actual geopolitical economic consequences will be almost none. Right, so I want to make it into this sort of flip the table, so to speak. Right, in that I'm coming from the least geopolitically relevant place in Europe, all the way to the heart of the conflict, where the heart of the resistance in Kyiv, and involve myself. So, in case people are wondering, why am I even going there? Basically, because I'm not just traveling to deliver the truck. I am actually moving to Kyiv. I'm bringing my luggage and my this desk over here, my equipment and everything to Kyiv to live there more or less indefinitely. The reason is that I would summarize it very briefly. I'd say I have used my brain to develop these wonderful worlds of ideas all my life, right? I love music. I am a musician as well. So I've been doing music, I've been doing science, mathematics, cinema, all this beautiful stuff, right? And I feel like I had it so good for so long that, and because my brain is my tool, that I now want to put my brain closer to a place where I could directly be helping out in the effort to resist. And I am aware, not just because I can think of it, but because my colleagues have directly told me that capable brains are especially needed right now, because there's extremely difficult strategic challenges that Ukraine is facing. Of course, for those following the news, the aerial attacks are very multi-layered. They are extremely complex in that the drones are following very complicated trajectories. It's no longer, a bullet or an artillery piece is flying in a parabola. It's this is basically a video game now, because this all the drones are turning and flying these very complicated paths. So all that complexity in defense is something that I have been training for all my life. Not specifically for that, but just to understand a system that it wasn't really there 3 years ago. And this is something that is not intuitive, that I want to also hammer down to your audience and to anyone who listens to this little explanation of the campaign. It's not intuitive to think that the warfare that we are observing in Ukraine nowadays did not exist in the world, not only in Ukraine, but anywhere in the world 5 years ago, right? It just did not exist. So, by the nature of the conflict being so confined, and the international support being so, let's say, full of obstacles, right? Because technically NATO is not it's not in, so Ukraine is not in the NATO alliance technically. The US is waiting to get out of the involvement as much as possible. All these complications are because of that nature. There hasn't been any broad development of the technologies and the doctrine to military theory around this conflict. So it's very much ongoing. And as you know, a lot of the developments in Ukraine have been about how they are gamifying their military to make it very efficient. How they are using really all kinds of resources they have in terms of programming and development in startups and industry collaborations and all that, to tackle the complexity of what they have. So my stance is, I don't have much to contribute in terms of fighting. I don't have any military experience. I don't know about weapons. I don't know about the specific needs for the front, but I can definitely help with complexity and modeling in systems, right? So in particular, I can help with aerial defense. I can help with modeling the different layers of defense, how you would use resources, how you would incorporate different kinds of tools in different kinds of quantities and things like that. So anyway, not to make too long, but basically, my mission there, I feel almost like a doctor, like a medical doctor, in the sense that there has been a diagnostic that, given the geopolitical forces at play in Ukraine, meaning Russia, Ukraine, but EU, United States, China, all the complex factors playing in, there is an illness that is aiding that territory, which means that every few days you will get flying explosives in the air, right? And those will fall on targets that range from, energy plants to apartment buildings to playgrounds to hospitals to churches to military targets, of course, as well. But, anything is a go. There's no sense of, there's a military doctrine that is kind of selecting targets in some kind of civilized way. Not at all. It is completely indiscriminate, and therefore civilian lives are at risk. So for me, that is almost like the diagnostic of an illness, that the projection is that this is not going to be resolved in the next 2 or 3 months, and therefore it's probably going to be more like 1 or 2 years of still some conflict, and we want to prevent as much of that death as possible. At least that's my prerogative. If I can bring up the interception rates, for drones to from 90 to 95, and from missiles from 70 to 75 or 80. That is good, because that's lives that you're saving. That's indirectly saving lives of innocent Ukrainians that are just about going about their lives in their homes, right? So for me, that is my calling. I in that process, that's not an immediate thing, because obviously I have to find the right environment, join the right team or the right initiative. But in the process, I will continue to do my scientific work. In the process, I will build bridges of collaboration from the international community. I run also an international association, research association, so that will also build some bridges with Ukraine. I will continue to do my research work from there and continue to operate from there generally with all that brings. But my midterm goal is to, try and ail this to aid in the ailment of this sorry in the in the process of treating this ailment of preventing, upping the rates of interception, detecting earlier, these kinds of things.
Okay, thank you very much. Um, I think we spoke about every question almost.
I believe so.
So thank you very much, Carlos, for participating in today's episode. Um, and we will also put the link to the fundraiser in the description of the video. And yes, thank you once again. It was a pleasure to speak with you, because yeah, your background makes this whole thing like quite different from what we can hear from others usually. So yes, um, and thank you for everyone that watched the video. Follow Carlos as well. We will also put his like links that will lead to his social media accounts. So yes, subscribe to us, to Forum Europaeum as well. Follow our Instagram and our TikTok channel. And yes, we will be back this summer. We have many projects, and we want to be more interactive um, as well. So yes, we will come up with new things. So once again, thank you very much for watching the video, and bye.
Thank you.